Okay, so here we are. Listen up. So today we're going to talk about domain and range. Domain and range. So I tried to make a good visual for you. So remember that domain. When we talk about the domain, we're talking about all of the possible x values. You have to go to the leftmost side of the graph and the rightmost side of the graph. All of the x values. Range is all of the y values. That's the bottommost and the topmost. Range is the y values. It's the bottommost and the topmost. So I'm going to just use this example that we have right here. So if I look at my graph and I go from the leftmost point to the rightmost point, notice that this has an open circle on it. Do you guys see that? I have an open circle there. That just means, if you think about inequalities, that just means that that number's not included. Okay? When I talk about my range, the lowest point down here, the highest point right here, the highest point also has an open circle because I have an open circle right there on my graph. So when we talk about our domain and our range, when we talk about our domain and range, what do those open circles mean? Well, a closed circle indicates that the endpoint value is included, meaning greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. Well, an open circle means that the endpoint value is not included. That's when we use less than or greater than. So what is the smallest number in our domain? It's, Alessandro. It's -3. Look at my red line that I just drew. It's -3. So -3, and it's got an open circle. That means it's less than all of the x values in the domain, which are, now I go to the largest point. What is that x value? 1. And is it a closed circle or an open circle? It's a closed circle. So it's going to be less than or equal to 1. When I look at my my range, what's the smallest number in my range? What's the smallest number in my range? -4. Is that an open circle or a closed circle? It's closed. So -4 is less than or equal to all of the y values in the range, which are less than, what's the largest y value in the range? What's the y value? You got to go over to the y-axis. What is the largest y value in the range? 0. Okay. All right, next one. So turn the page. We're going to use that idea of lines. Guys, I need you to focus on this. So the side conversations have got to stop. So we're going to use a line. Remember that our domain is talking about our x values. So our x-axis is horizontal. So we're going to just draw a horizontal line above this. Tell me about this endpoint right above this horizontal line. Tell me about this endpoint. Is it an open circle, a closed circle, or an arrow? It's an open circle. I want you to put that on your line. Put an open circle there. Okay? Tell me about this point right here on the far right side. Is it an open circle, a closed circle, or an arrow? It's an arrow. That means it's going to go on forever. Okay? So let's look at our domain. What is the smallest value in the domain? What's the smallest number? It's about right here. What is that? It's like -2.5. Is that going to be what kind of what kind of inequality are you going to use there? It's open circle. Is it going to be less than or equal to? Less than. What's happening on the far right side? It goes on forever. So that says negative 2.5 is less than x. Remember when we write inequalities, we want the variable term to come first. So we said that if the variable term comes first, what do we have to do to the symbol? The inequality sign, what do we have to do to it?
We have to flip it.
Flip it. So x, the domain, is greater than negative 2.5. All numbers that are greater than negative 2.5. This is all of the numbers that are greater than negative 2.5. All of the numbers that are greater than negative 2.5. Okay? Do we feel okay with that? Let's look at our range. I have to start with the smallest number. The lowest value of my range has a closed circle. Do you guys see that? And then I'm going to see how high it goes. When I get to the very top, do I have a closed circle, open circle, or an arrow?
You have open circle
And a what?
and an arrow.
And an arrow. Remember that we're talking about all of the values of y that get touched by the graph. So even though 10 doesn't get touched on the left side, does the number 10 get touched on the right side? Yes. So let's see. What is the smallest y value? Lissandro, stand up. That's twice. What is the smallest y value? Negative 4. The smallest y value is negative 4, and then it goes on forever. Y is greater than or equal to negative 4. All of the values in your range are greater than or equal to negative 4. It's greater than or equal to because these are closed circles. These are closed circles. Okay? Let's go to this one right here in the middle. Let's talk about our range, our domain. Domain across the top. So I'm going to just draw a line across the top. What is happening on the leftmost side of my graph? Open circle, closed circle, arrow. Arrow. What is happening on the rightmost side of my graph? Open circle, closed circle, arrow. Arrow. That means x can be any number. How do I show that? Well, we write it as a set, and we say x such that x is all real numbers. That double, like when I make a capital R, but I put two lines vertically, that's the symbol for all real numbers. X can be anything. It can be negative 2. It can be 2,785,000. It can be 7 pi. It can be the square root of 12. All of those are real numbers. They're weird looking numbers, but they're real. Okay? Now let's talk about our range. Let's talk about our range. So this is the smallest, the lowest point on my graph, the smallest point. And it looks to me like it's got a closed circle. And then when I go up, what is the highest point? Arrow, open circle, or closed? Arrow, open circle, or closed at the highest point?
Arrow.
Arrow. So what does that mean? What does that mean?
That it goes on like further.
Yeah, but what's the smallest y value?
Negative 4.
So y is greater than or equal to negative 4. I'm going to write this one as a set as well so you guys get used to seeing that. So I'm going to put my little squiggly bracket, y such that y is greater than or equal to negative 4. Ma'am? That's a good question. So when we talk about using set notation, the first Y tells us that we're only focused on the Y's. It's like, hey, we're talking about the domain here. And then that line means such that, or therefore, or it's just a way, that line represents, hey, we're talking about the range, blank. It's like a comma. Well, what can you tell me about the range? The range is greater than or equal to -4. That's what that line means. That's a great question. So like in math, we don't use commas to represent a word, right? We just use it to represent space. So that line is really read as therefore or such that. Okay, good question. Okay, let's go to the one right below it. Let's talk about the domain. So my domain, what is the leftmost point on my graph? Well, when I draw my line over the top of it, the leftmost point, does it have a closed circle, open circle, or arrow? Closed circle. What is the number that it lines up to on the x-axis? Okay. The far right side, the rightmost side of my graph, closed circle, open circle, arrow. Open circle. What number does that line up with? 2. Okay, so let's talk about our inequality. We're going to write it as a set. So we're going to say the domain, that's what x is, such that, what's this inequality going to be? So we have to use 2 numbers. Look at our first example that we did on the front page. When we have 2 numbers, what do we say? We put the smallest number first, -3. Because it's a closed circle, am I going to use what? Is it going to be less than or less than and equal to? Less than or equal to. Good job, Isaac. Less than or equal to all of the x values, all of the domain, which is open circle, less than 2. Okay. Now I'm going to look at my range. When I look at the lowest point on my graph, the very lowest point on my graph, it has a closed circle. And then I'm going to follow it up to the highest point on my graph, which is actually right here at 4. It's touching the 4, so that's also going to be a closed circle. Closed circle. Let's see, the lowest point, it lines up with -5, and the highest point lines up with 4. How do I write that as an inequality? 2 closed circles. Well, y such that, who's going to write this inequality for me? Ariana, give it a try. What's the smallest number?
-5.
Okay. And I have a closed circle, so that means I use what? Less than or equal to. Yes, ma'am. Less than or equal to y. And then up at the top, I have another closed circle. So that means it's also less than or 4. Okay. Starting to make sense? Does it help to draw the lines that represent the direction of the range and the direction of the domain? Okay. We have 2 more to talk about. So what is going on here? Oh my goodness. So when you see something like this that's got a lot going on, a lot of turning points, use the same idea. What is the smallest or the leftmost point on your graph? Talking about the domain, what is the leftmost point on my graph? -8. And is it a closed circle or an open circle? Closed circle. Now let's go to the rightmost point of my graph. The rightmost point of my graph. What is that? 2. Is it a closed circle or an open circle? Open. So Kenna, let's write it. The domain. So set bracket, x, all the values of the domain, such that, what are we going to write for our inequality? Smallest number first. -8. And because it's a closed circle, are we going to use less than or less than equal to? Good job. less than or equal to x, and then the next number is a 2, and it has an open circle. So is that less than equal to or just less than? Good job. All right. Tim, I'm calling to you for the range. I'm going to go to the very lowest point on my graph. That's right here. Does this point right here, is it going to be a closed circle or an open circle? Closed circle. Very nice, sir. Then I'm going to go to the very top most point of my graph. Is this point right here going to be a closed circle or an open circle? What is the lowest point of the graph? What number represents it?
-8.
And the highest point of the graph?
6.
Perfect. You think you can write the inequality and set notation for us?
Yeah.
Perfect. Y
Such
such that?
that -8 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 6.
Perfect. Good job. Ma'am? Okay.
Like where -8 is, where like the graph goes down,
Uh-huh.
how do you know if it's gonna be an open circle or a closed circle?
That's a great question. So if this point right here was going to be an open circle, it would have an open circle on it, like this, just like this point does and this point does.
So if it doesn't have an open circle, it's closed?
It's closed. Yes, ma'am. Good question. Good question. Okay. Last one. What is that? It's kind of a circle, yeah. So what do we think? What is the lowest point of our graph? Well, let's do the leftmost point. Sorry, leftmost point. -4. Open circle or closed circle? Closed. What's the rightmost point of our graph? 2. Open circle or closed circle? So -4 to 2. Avery, I want you to tell us what the inequality is going to be for this. I'll get you started. X such that, what's the smallest number? So -4. Because it's a closed circle, are we going to use the less than or the less than equal to? Good job. Less than or equal to x. And what's the largest number? Closed circle. So what symbol is that? Yes, ma'am. Here's why that is. This is our domain right here. So -4 is less than or equal to x. Do you guys see that? -4 is less than or equal to x in terms of a number line. But x, where it's positioned, is less than or equal to 2. It's not greater than. Do you see how that works? Let me make that nice and big for you. Think of this as a number line. Okay? Let's talk about our range. Isaac, what is the smallest number or the lowest point on my graph? Lowest. -1. Open circle or closed circle? Okay. What is the highest point of my graph? Is that going to be closed circle or open circle? Closed. So y is in between there. Since y is in between it, that means that -1 is less than y, right? But y is underneath the 4, so y is less than or equal to the 4. They're less than or equal to because it's closed. So let's write our inequality. Isaac, I'm counting on you. What am I going to write? Such that? Smallest number. What's your variable we're talking about? What? What? Okay. Yes, you're right. Less than or equal to 4.